one problem with American government and I'd say American policy overall, in both domestic and foreign, is that it hasn't centered the American people and what is best for the American people as a whole, hasn't put them first and foremost. It's either put special interest groups or, in the case of American foreign policy, it's prioritized the good of this liberal international order or, trying to achieve global liberal hegemony over prioritizing what is actually required to keep Americans safe and prosperous. And our foreign policy has become so disastrous and so many things tangled up into it that I can't blame President Trump for focusing a lot of his effort and energy on it. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't things that can and should be done at home and that we need to be focusing on some major issues here at home. But look, our foreign policy over the last 30 years has been disastrous. And to safely untangle ourselves from the mess that has been created by previous administrations is going to require some effort and focus. And honestly, Nick, it's going to be messy at times.
Howdy, everyone, and welcome back to Moment of Truth, the podcast of American Moment. My name is Nick Solheim, and I'm the CEO of American Moment, and I am very glad to have you back with us this week. We have our great friend, Dan Caldwell, here in studio to share some exciting news. We also talked about the ongoing negotiations over Russia and Ukraine, why foreign policy personnel matters so much, the new national security strategy, and why you shouldn't go to Christmas parties. So it was a truly fantastic episode. We've been huge fans of Dan for a long time, and we're very excited to have him join us for another episode of Moment of Truth. So we will go now to Dan Caldwell. Dan, thanks so much for coming back on the podcast.
Nick, it's an honor as always.
We always have a blast when Dan Caldwell is in the chair. So we're putting out this podcast because we made a very exciting announcement today that you are now a senior fellow for foreign policy at American Moment, something that we are extremely excited about because you and I and many of the members of our team have been friends with you for a long time. We admire you greatly. We're very glad to have you aboard, but tell us a little bit about what it is exactly that you're going to be doing at American Moment in your own words.
Well, I've been working with you all in, I guess you could say, an unofficial capacity since you were founded in 2021, really focusing on partnering with you on training your fellows on American foreign policy, explaining, why our foreign policy doesn't work, what needs to happen to make it better, going through different parts of the world and explaining, why certain things are happening there. And so in a lot of ways, I'm going to be doing that and more of it. I'm also going to be continuing to publicly talk about foreign policy, whether it's things like the Russia-Ukraine war, which I have a lot of experience working on in the administration and before and after, what is going on in the Middle East, and also just talking more about America's role in the world generally, because as we've discussed on this podcast, a lot of the problems that our country's been facing, in particular the last few decades, goes back to our failed American foreign policy. So whether you're looking at issues like our debt and deficit, our challenges around illegal drugs, a lot of our challenges with broken communities, in one way or another, that traces back to things like the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. It goes back to how we've dealt with the rise of China. It goes back to how we viewed America's, role in this supposed rules-based liberal international order. And, being a part of that means like you have to have certain policies around trade and immigration. So almost every issue that American Moment deals with in one way or another goes back to foreign policy. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking to continue what I've been doing with you all for the last few years and doing more of it. And I'm really excited about that.
Yeah. Yeah, as many of the people who listen to this podcast know, foreign policy is one of the issues that we care the most about. And in the top three that we care about, I think it's the one that touches the most. The issues that the president ran on originally in 2015, where he had a heterodox viewpoint of the conservative movement, were trade, immigration, and foreign policy. And one could argue that foreign policy has contributed a lot to the issues we've had with the other two as well. So it's extremely important, and we're very glad to have you here. Why is it a good use of your time to do something like this at a place like American Moment? Like what did you see in this that made it matter to you?
So ideas matter. Uh, Policy proposals, white papers matter. You can talk about, are think tanks relevant or not anymore? I still believe they are. But ultimately, at the end of the day, for good policy to actually work, you need good people to implement it in the legislative branch and in the executive branch. And also, too, you still need people on the outside in the conservative ecosystem to continue to push the boundaries around the discussion around American foreign policy. And I can't think of another organization over the last 4 or 5 years that has generated more talent that is able to occupy key positions, both the executive branch, the legislative branch, and then also, too, in the broader conservative institution ecosystem. And again, hundreds of if not thousands of people who've come through your programs are occupying important positions across government, across the conservative movement. And I can't, I've said this before, I can't think of an organization that has had more impact on the talent front than American Moment. And so I want to see more good people who can work, again, in the movement, but also in government, because for our foreign policy ultimately to change, we need people who are going to be able to stand up to the national security bureaucracy within our own government, but then also the foreign policy establishment that creates the conditions for America to keep doing the wrong things around foreign policy. So again, American Moment, I think, is a key part of fixing our foreign policy, and that's why I'm really honored to be a part of this organization.
Yeah. Well, we really appreciate it, and it means a lot coming from you. On this personnel issue, which is obviously what this entire organization exists to resolve, I think there's been no issue where the president has been attacked for his views than on foreign policy, and for 10 years that has been the case. Um, and I think that has resulted in a real concerted effort to try to box out people who not only reflect his ideological worldview as it relates to foreign policy, but also the people that he has handpicked, like Steve Witkoff, as an example. Um, what are the incentives around, um, this sort of campaign by the neocons and the primacists to, like, how have they been able to keep this up for the last 10 years? And what are the strategies that they employ to keep our people out?
First of all, a lot of it is actually, I've come to believe, driven by pettiness and personal jealousy. Rachel Bovard, who I know is a good friend of American Moment, a good friend of mine, she often talks about how a lot of people think Washington D.C. is like House of Cards, but it's more like Mean Girls.
Yeah.
And I think that sums it up perfectly. A
Yeah.
lot of the attacks against Steve Witkoff, in my view, are driven by jealousy. Here's a guy who's not a professional diplomat. He didn't go to Georgetown. He didn't spend 30 years toiling away at the State Department and then doing fellowships at the Brookings Institution or at AI. And in the last 9, 10 months, he's accomplished more in advancing peace and stability than someone like Victoria Nuland or Tony Blinken or Brett McGurk or certainly John Bolton. And you just see this jealousy and this pettiness just oozing out of people when they go after Steve Witkoff, or they go after the vice president, or now they're going after the Army Secretary Dan Driscoll, who's beginning to work on Ukraine, or even Secretary Rubio. There's just an insane amount of jealousy. But putting that aside, I think that there is a real fear right now among people who have been part of this foreign policy consensus the last 30 years. They are being displaced. Indisputably, they are no longer the dominant voice. And the tactics that they were able to use for so long, accusing people of being anti-American or weak or isolationists, those attacks just aren't landing. In fact, when you hear somebody saying that about you, that's the biggest sign that you're right. Yeah. So instead of saying, okay, not only have our policies failed for the last 30 years, because God forbid anybody admit that, saying we should look at the world differently. It's obviously changed. Let's look at doing things differently. And maybe they don't land where you and I land, but at least they look at doing things differently. That's too hard. That's the honorable way to do things, but it's too hard, so they're not going to do that. They're just going to double down on the same tactics. They're going to try and smear people. They're going to try and accuse them of working for foreign powers. They're going to try and say that they're going to create another 1939 moment, because the only war these people seem to know about is World War II.
Yeah.
And that's the tactics they're going to use. But at the end of the day, I really, again, to sum it up, really comes down to two things in my views: is the jealousy and pettiness, and then the fact that they're getting challenged in a real way, and they're being displaced from being the dominant force in American foreign policy making.
Yeah. I had the opportunity to meet Steve Witkoff earlier this year briefly.
Yeah.
One of the coolest people I've ever met. Like, very fascinating, very fascinating guy. Can you talk a little bit more about him specifically, and also just because this year has felt like simultaneously it was 1 month and also a decade. Can you just recap for us the accomplishments that he has had specifically this year?
Well, I think that, first and foremost, he has, and this is a very small thing, but in a lot of ways, it's also very important, big, is that he's been responsible for freeing American hostages, Americans wrongly detained in places like Russia. Also, I believe Iran as well, too. He helped, hopefully permanently, end the war in Gaza and free dozens of Israeli hostages. I believe, American hostages as well, too.
Yeah, I think a lot of those were dual citizens.
Yes. And so, the very least, he's helped save lives. And again, I should note, too, he's had a lot of support. Jared Kushner, who he has brought on board, is also helped with that. And Jared, somebody who also comes from an unconventional background. But look at what he accomplished in the first term. A lot of people said the same thing about him, and he helped drive the Abraham Accords. And I know there's some people in the Restraint movement that are skeptical of the Abraham Accords. I am not one of them. I think that it actually could be a way for us to help get out of the region if done properly. And again, that, they're looking to build on that. And I think most importantly, in terms of what could have the biggest long-term impact, is that he is really start to move the United States in a new direction on how it approaches the war in Ukraine and U.S.-Russia relations. And again, this is why he's getting attacked so viciously, is because so many people were starting to build this idea that Russia was still the Soviet Union, which it is not. The Soviet Union was in charge of essentially a global communist empire, a global communist bloc that you had these ideological alliances between countries that posed a real challenge to the United States. But Russia, they're a country that does bad things. They're not often a good actor, but they are not the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
And it is in our interests to get to some sort of strategic stability with them. And Steve Witkoff, I think, recognizes that, and he's pursuing a path that will get us back to a place where relations are more stable. And as part of that, will end the Russia-Ukraine war. And the longer that war goes on, the more Ukrainians die, the less chance that Ukraine has at a decent peace in a sovereign and prosperous future. And also, there's an increased risk that there could be an incident that ultimately spirals into a conflict between a nuclear armed Russia and NATO. And obviously, I don't think I have to explain why that would be a very bad thing.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I suppose with the biggest question that this raises for me is, you've got Witkoff, who is responsible for like resolving 4 conflicts in different parts of the globe all at the same time. Um, and on the other hand, you have the foreign policy establishment with its many doctorates, degrees, and sinecures from all these leading institutions, many of which take foreign money, by the way. Um, and I suppose my question to you is like, how has the paradigm shifted enough to where those having those same institutional affiliations matters? Like, does that still matter?
This is a very good question. And, to be honest with you, is this isn't something that I'm completely sure of myself. I do think that having experience and some level of education and knowledge is important.
Mhm.
However, if President Trump said this in his first big foreign policy speech almost 10 years ago at the Mayflower Hotel. I don't remember the exact words, but he's talking about like all these highly credentialed people and all the failures that they've driven. Is credentials in and of himself are not a sign that somebody is going to be a great executioner or a great practitioner of American foreign policy.
Mhm.
And again, we've seen that borne out time and time again across multiple administrations, both Republicans and Democrats. Like they called the crew that helped get us in the Vietnam War under Robert McNamara and some of their colleagues, in the Kennedy and Johnson administration, the whiz kids. And there was a book written about them called The Best and the Brightest, because that's what they called them. And the policy they drove in Southeast Asia was disastrous.
Mhm.
And again, that I think was the first warning sign that just because somebody's gone to Harvard or that they've done all these internships and they have all these credentials doesn't mean that they're going to actually do the right thing. And
Yeah.
and again, I think people are finding that out. And I just would point out that that's why a lot of the people in key roles in administrations don't necessarily come from the same academic or professional backgrounds as, say, you'd find in the George W. Bush administration or
Right.
certainly a Joe Biden administration.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing that's been really interesting during this administration is I think a lot of the attitudes from members on the Hill in the House and the Senate largely remain unchanged. Like the people and the groups of people who are opposed to some of the president's foreign policy priorities in the first term versus now,
Mhm.
largely the same group of people. However, again, we work on this like staffing question,
Mhm.
and even if it's a member that's not aligned with our worldview, by and large, the young conservatives here in DC are completely aligned with the president, the vice president, in his worldview on foreign policy. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about why this sort of because the Democrats are the peaceniks, right? Like
Huh.
that's where you would expect a realist and or where a lot of people think you would expect a realist and restraint movement to come out of. And so I'm curious why you think this has happened on the right, much more so, in my opinion, that like you have Ro Khannas and stuff, but those are kind of rare.
Yes.
So why has this happened more on the right than on the left?
Well, this is a very good question that we could almost devote an entire show to. So to kind of keep it top level, I think um, one, you can't deny President Trump playing a key role in this, is that he has the leader of the party and the leader of the country has created the space for more people who, in a lot of cases, probably believe these things for a long time, but were afraid to speak out about it, for these people to now more openly express their views.
Mhm.
And I don't believe that actually foreign policy is a major issue for most staffers in DC. And I don't even think historically it's been a major issue for a lot of members. And in a lot of cases, members are voting on foreign policy based on what they perceive as the political incentives. Like they're in Congress because they care about foreign policy or immigration or economic policy, or because they're a fail son and their dads make them get a job or something. You know, and they don't arrive in Congress particularly knowledgeable or passionate about foreign policy, and they fall where they perceive as political incentives. I think that in a lot of cases for members is that they are disconnected still from a lot of their voters on key issues, and foreign policy is one of them. But the staff, I think, because they're the ones who have to interact with the voters the most, they're picking up where they really are. And then they've come up in a time, most of your staff are in your 20s or early 30s. They've come up in a time where they grew up, they were born either right before 9/11 or right after, but they grew up in a post 9/11 war where they saw nothing but American foreign policy failure in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, Eastern Europe. We've seen the migration crisis out of Latin and South America, and that's an immigration failure, but that's also a foreign policy failure. We've seen the rise of China. And so having grown up in that environment and seeing, again, nothing but foreign policy failure, it's pretty hard to think and believe that we should keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result.
Yeah. This is anecdotal based on my experience interviewing thousands of candidates for our fellowship program over the last 5 years. They I would say maybe 60 to 70% of them, their top issue is foreign policy.
Yes.
That's what they want to work on. There's also this interesting narrative, and we didn't talk about this ahead of time, so I'm curious to hear what you think about this, but there's been this narrative out there that we're focusing too much on foreign policy. We're not focused enough on domestic issues. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Well, here's what I would respond to that is that I think that one problem with American government and I'd say American policy overall, in both domestic and foreign, is that it hasn't centered the American people and what is best for the American people as a whole, hasn't put them first and foremost. It's either put special interest groups or, in the case of American foreign policy, it's prioritized the good of this liberal international order or, trying to achieve global liberal hegemony over prioritizing what is actually required to keep Americans safe and prosperous. And our foreign policy has become so disastrous and so many things tangled up into it that I can't blame President Trump for focusing a lot of his effort and energy on it. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't things that can and should be done at home and that we need to be focusing on some major issues here at home. But look, our foreign policy over the last 30 years has been disastrous. And to safely untangle ourselves from the mess that has been created by previous administrations is going to require some effort and focus. And honestly, Nick, it's going to be messy at times. Mm-hmm. I think that us getting to a final peace in Ukraine is going to be messy. It's going to look ugly, but in the long run, it's going to be better for the United States of America. And so I think that I understand why people who are dealing with real issues here at home around, what it takes to actually raise a family and live a decent life, concerns about are we doing enough around immigration or other issues. And I think that the administration clearly that is still a priority, indisputably.
Yeah.
I can understand why maybe they would think, well, the president's spending so much time overseas. We're hearing so much about what Secretary Rubio is doing or Vice President Pence is doing or Dan Driscoll or Steve Witkoff is doing around Ukraine that they think, well, our government's not focusing on that. I get that. But again, we cannot truly fix our country if we don't fix our foreign policy. And that's going to require some attention and focus from our key leaders to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. My line on this has been that it's much more complicated than people are making it out to be. Like we were discussing earlier, that foreign policy touches
Yes.
all of these issues. So, wrapped up in all the president's foreign trips have been, you know, keeping America's sons and daughters out of harm's way. It's been getting trade deals done.
Yes.
It's been
That's
getting major corporations to invest in manufacturing facilities in the United States. I mean, I sort of think it's a lot more complicated than some people are making it out to
that
be.
is an important point. Okay. When President Trump's going overseas, he's not breaking ground on a new girls' school in Al Anbar province or in Helmand province, or he's not, talking about like, the importance of gay rights in, Saudi Arabia. He's there talking about, what is ultimately in America's interest in trying to switch relationships that have either been unequal or have been, what I would say dependent relationships, like what we've seen in Europe. Like we, uh, wealthy European states have played us, for suckers.
Mhm.
They've turned Uncle Sam into Uncle Sucker. And President Trump is starting to rebalance that. And when he was in the Middle East, what was he spending most time talking about is how he can get more investment back in the United States, not talking about liberal values or not hectoring them. Oh, you need to change your policies around this or that. It's like, no, we're going to drive deals that are in both our country's interest and that will ultimately help the American people and these countries as well too.
Mhm.
And I think that's often missed in a lot of these discussions.
Yeah, I totally I totally agree. Um, it's been a bit of a tumultuous year for you.
Yes.
You and I worked together on the president's transition team down in West Palm after the election. We worked really closely together. Oh, we lost the light bulb. Oh well. Together on the Department of Defense specifically. You went into the administration as a senior advisor
Mhm.
to Secretary Hegseth, and you left in, is it April?
Yes.
Okay. So it was in April. There's been a lot of talk, both from you. You've gone out and have said what's happened and what your attitude is about it. And there are also a lot of people who have, in my view, falsely slandered you. And I think what our listeners want to know is, how have things been going since then? And how are you feeling about, you know, the Pentagon and the president's foreign policy priorities these days?
This has been one of the most difficult years of my life. I would say even more difficult than nearly the year I spent in Iraq. But I'm not ending the year full of bitterness. I'm actually ending the year incredibly grateful because I've learned some key lessons that I think will hopefully help guide me going forward in my life. I think the first one is when you find yourself in a position like I did in April, along with, my good friend Darren Selnick, who's also been on the show, and Colin Carroll, where you've been in your mind wronged, smeared, and you know had your good name just nearly utterly destroyed. I mean, again, I've talked about this before. I was getting death threats. People were posting pictures of my kids online. I didn't understand what was happening for a few weeks. I think a lot of people assumed, and I think some people hoped, that I was going to then turn around and attack and try and undermine the Trump administration and the Department of War. And I got some good advice from some very good people, some people that I will owe a lot to the rest of my life, that was the wrong way to go, that being bitter and vengeful was the wrong approach. And so I looked forward. I started to move on from that. And most importantly, I think I demonstrated that I still wanted my former colleagues at the Department of War and within the administration to succeed. And I want them to succeed because them succeeding is good for the country. Them succeeding means we fix our foreign policy. And we don't have more of these endless wars where thousands of America's sons and daughters die unnecessarily, that we aren't sinking tens of billions of dollars into parts of the world that just are generally not important to the United States of America. We don't have hundreds of thousands of veterans that are afflicted by injuries from the war, illnesses from the war, mental health issues. Um, I, if I really believe in what I believe in, which obviously I do, it would have been incredibly selfish of me to turn around and just spent my days trying to blow up what I, in my mind, helped build.
Mhm.
And so that's why when, the Secretary of War or my former colleagues at Department of Defense, who I still, love and respect, when they do something good, I'm out there cheering them on. When somebody's lying about them or misrepresenting something, I call out those people that are lying and misrepresenting them. And I think that most people have come to realize that the things that were said back in April, there wasn't really anything to back it up. And, so I think most everybody's moved on. But the key thing for me is, and the most important lesson was to not be bitter and vengeful in situations like that.
Yeah. And I think the last point that you made is that was what I was thinking of, was that you and Darren Selnick in particular did a lot of work both like before the administration and at the very beginning to lay the groundwork for a lot of the success that has happened at the Pentagon since.
Yeah.
Um,
Darren Selnick, for example, played a key role in the trans ban, and that was just held up by the court. And that's fantastic. And that's a result of the work, not just of Darren, but the whole Department of War team.
yeah.
And so, again, it's great to see that. It's great to see. I thought the Secretary Hegseth's speech at the Reagan Forum was
Mhm.
great. I know a lot of people in that room didn't like to hear that, but they needed to hear it. And I'm glad to see him say a lot of the things that he did there.
Yeah, yeah, that was a truly great speech. Uh, Shortly after you left the Pentagon, you were diagnosed with cancer,
Yes.
which you and I were talking through that whole period of time, and it was a bit of a roller coaster. Tell us how all of that panned out and how you're doing. I know you've posted publicly about it some, so I think people know that you're doing
Yeah.
relatively well, all things considered. But tell us a little bit about that experience.
So what I can say is, sitting here today, I am incredibly blessed. Might have cancer, but I feel in some ways like one of the luckiest people on earth. And I'll explain why, and just bear with me. Um, I think you and I were talking the day this happened. So I had sinus surgery at the end of July. I had some sinus issues related to my exposure to burn pits in Iraq. Had a great sinus surgeon, by the way. Want to shout out Dr. Abedin at Loudon Medical Group. Did a fantastic job. But about a week and a half after that, I felt good. I took my kids out and I came back. It was August. It was hot, and I felt lightheaded, and I collapsed. And my oldest daughter called 911, and I thought that I was something related to my sinus surgery, that I was having a hemorrhage. And the EMTs get there, and I quickly kind of realized, like, you know what? This is dehydration. I'm dehydrated. I didn't drink enough water. And I kind of felt like an idiot because, I'm a Marine, and they're always telling you, the solution to every illness and sickness is drink water and change your socks.
Yeah.
I just was embarrassed. And so I was apologizing to the paramedics on the way to the hospital. So they took me to the hospital. Doctors look at me like, yeah, you're dehydrated. You didn't drink enough water. And I could kind of tell, like, they were thinking, you idiot. And yeah, I kind of felt like that. But, I still collapsed. I may have hit my head. So they have to do all these scans. And they do an x-ray, chest x-ray, and they see a mass in my chest. Like, okay, we got to take a look at that. I go and get I think it was a CT scan, and they see, yeah, it's a mass around your thymoma. So kind of in your chest area here. Like, okay, well, this is probably one of three things: germ cell tumor, thymoma, or, some type of lymphoma. And they make this, they didn't think it was uh, uh, the Hodgkin's lymphoma at first. So they said, okay, we're just going to pull this tumor out. So I got surgery to pull the tumor out.
And it was like,
It
if
was
I recall you saying, it was like softball size.
it was the size of a baseball. So they did this robotic surgery. If it would have been any bigger, they would have had to crack my chest open and I would have been in the hospital longer. So they took it out. And again, there were, no other signs that I had anything. And they did a biopsy on it. And turns out it was Hodgkin's lymphoma. And so I've been undergoing chemotherapy since then. I just had a PET scan and everything was good. And I'm on track to finish it by January. And again, I feel incredibly lucky because if we go back to when I collapsed, if I probably would have drank 2 more bottles of water that day, I probably wouldn't have found out about this until the tumor got big enough where it could have constricted my aorta or start screwing my lungs or my heart. And the cancer would have been a lot more advanced. And I can't help but see the hand of God in that. And I again feel incredibly blessed. And I have to say, my doctor believes that this is related to my exposure to burn pits in Iraq. 2 other Marines I served with in my company in Iraq have the same cancer. And unfortunately, they caught it later. They're going to be fine, but their recovery has been a lot more difficult than mine.
Yeah.
And that's why it just I can't help but feel incredibly blessed by the whole experience.
Yeah. Well, and you've been keeping a a grueling schedule too. So for people who don't know, you've been doing this fellowship out at the University of Chicago, and you have been spending, like, from my understanding, all week out there and then coming back on Friday to get chemo, recovering all weekend, and then going back out to Chicago. I mean,
Yes.
that is just like amazing that you're able to even do that.
Yes. And I thought I was going to have to pull out of that fellowship. And again, I was very fortunate. Chemo can have a lot of side effects. I thought I'd be bald by now. My hair is starting to kind of thin out. We'll see if by the end of this, I'm completely bald. So far, not so much. I've had some issues with pain in my arm and my arms and legs. I've had issues with fatigue, but I haven't had a lot of nausea. I haven't had some of the worst side effects. Again, that could change over the next couple of weeks, but even if it does, I'm in great shape. There's been no spread of the cancer. PET scan came back as normal as it could be. And so I've been very lucky these last few months.
Yeah. Well, praise God for that.
Absolutely.
So with all of this stuff, like, the viewers and listeners will understand why I've said now that you've had a tumultuous year.
Yeah.
What have been the biggest lessons that you've learned, as a public figure while you've been going through all of this?
Well, the one that I said earlier about not being vengeful and bitter is, yeah, I was angry. I'm a man. I'm a human being about things that happened. But I will tell you, and there's certain things I can't get into, but this is one lesson, is there were things at the beginning of this that I thought I knew, that I thought were drivers behind what happened to me, that I later found out were not true. And that people that I thought did me wrong or played a key role actually had nothing to do with it. And so you have to be careful in situations like this and not assume stuff and wait for the facts to develop. We had a term in the military, you hear it a lot, special forces guys like to use it. These special forces guys pay 50 grand to go talk to your company. Use the term tactical patience. That's important.
Yeah.
I
was thinking sometimes holding your fire is the best course of action.
Exactly. And there's also, and this relates to the other big lesson, there's also a lot of people that want to exploit you in moments like that want to try and weaponize you to achieve their own ends. And there were a lot of reporters and media figures that wanted me to come on their shows and bash the president and bash the secretary. And, I did not take them up on that. But I think, other than not being vengeful and bitter, the other biggest lesson is you're going to quickly learn who your true friends are and who are people of character. And you're also going to realize how important your family is. Because at the end of the day, they're your ultimate backstop, and they're the people that are going to matter most to you and truly hold you up. But, in Washington, D.C., there's an assumption that almost every relationship is transactional. And I've fortunately found that not to be true.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that are generally good and who know when something is wrong and when something is right and can tell the difference and are willing to stand up when something is wrong and call it out and help people who've been wronged. And I've been fortunate to find that I have a lot of people in my orbit and people that I've known and been friends with that understand, even people that I haven't been particularly close to. Let me tell you, there's also been people who I've absolutely disagreed with vociferously, who I've attacked online and gotten into stupid Twitter arguments with, stupid X arguments with, who said, you know what, this doesn't sound like the Dan Caldwell I know. He may be a crazy isolationist, but he wouldn't do something like this.
Yeah.
And that was refreshing to see that there are people able to put aside ideological differences and call out right and wrong.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that. And there's a whole group of guys that you and I are friends with who, we were all friends before all of this happened, but have gotten a lot closer, this year because of it. And I'm sad you lost your job, but I am very grateful for that.
And everything happens for a reason.
Yeah.
And we'll find out what God's plan is. Where it's being revealed to us, I think. And again, I've been I'm ending the year in a place of peace and gratefulness.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, on that super serious note, let's talk about the national security strategy.
Yes.
Could you, so I've read it. I assume some of the people who listen to and watch this podcast have read it. But for those who have not, could you summarize this? It's like 40 pages, right? Something like that. Could you distill that into a couple minutes, what people need to know?
I could distill it into 30 seconds. This is an extraordinary document in ways that shouldn't be extraordinary. But we live in a world where for the last 30 years, these national security strategies have largely prioritized the good of the liberal world order as opposed to what is required to keep Americans safe and prosperous. This document is extraordinary because it actually prioritizes the interests of the American people as opposed to a rules-based international order or liberal hegemony or human rights or autocracy versus democracy, whatever buzzword you've heard come out of the blob. This document pushes that all aside and focuses on what this administration thinks is best for the American people, and the strategy flows from that.
Yeah.
And it is also a decisive break from the post-Cold War foreign policy consensus of primacy. And that is why it is an incredibly important document and why so many people are freaking out about it.
Yeah. So break it down for us, region by region. What does it say about Latin America, about Europe, about Asia, and so on?
So this proves that actually a lot of people haven't actually read the document, or they've read the document and they're being deceitful about what it says. So first and foremost, let's start in our own backyard, in our own, hemisphere. It makes clear that the Western Hemisphere is the most important part of the world because that's where we live. We live here. And this is where we need to have more focus and more resources because, again, since these national security strategies have prioritized a global order as opposed to what is in the American people's interest, the Western Hemisphere is often left out or pushed to the bottom of the pile. This document prioritizes the Western Hemisphere, brings back the importance of the Monroe Doctrine with the Trump corollary. And I think that's fantastic. In Europe, it makes clear the Europeans need to step up and do more to secure their own backyard, but they also need to reverse their civilizational decline. And this is where there's been the most freak out, because the document rightly calls out the policies that the Europeans have pursued for the last few decades that have caused them to decline economically, militarily, and culturally. And people are leaving out why the document focuses on that. It's because we want to be partners with Europe. We think, it says in the document, it is in America's strategic interest to be partners with Europe. But they can't be effective partners if they don't do things to reverse their own decline, if they don't take more responsibility for their own defense, if we don't end the Russia-Ukraine war, and if they don't fix a lot of their bad policies, primarily driven for the EU, that have undermined economic growth, constrained innovation, and also undermined individual freedom. So that is the goal, is we want Europe to change course so they can be effective partners with us. In the Middle East, again, there's not a whole lot of focus on the Middle East, and that's a good thing. It recognizes we have strong partners in the Middle East, and they can do a lot to secure their own backyard and to satisfy our core interests in the region, which are primarily ensuring there isn't the rise of regional hegemon and an external hegemon doesn't come in and dominate it. And so, again, it doesn't center Middle East in American foreign policy like it has for far too long. And then in China, it recognizes China has emerged as a serious economic competitor, that they have done things that have led to unfair trade practices and they've gotten economic advantages over that. And we need to change that. But it's not about changing it through military force or things like that. It's getting to a better deal with them, which President Trump is doing. But it also recognizes, yes, there are security threats and that the United States needs to focus hard power resources to deter the threats posed by China. But we don't want to do things like change strategic ambiguity around Taiwan that could lead to a conflict. So again, those probably listening to this and saying, well, that all makes sense. Well, it's not common sense for our foreign policy establishment. And that's why, again, it's an extraordinary document when it shouldn't be extraordinary.
Right. One thing that I think has been really interesting throughout all of this. So the NSS came out a couple of days ago, and then immediately after you had the NDAA, which the National Defense Authorization Act, which does not seem to reflect a lot of those priorities, from my understanding. How does it seem to you that the majority of the Republican conference in the House and the Senate and so on are thinking about this NSS?
Well, we don't know ultimately how Republicans are going to vote on the NDAA. We're starting to see some Republican opposition starting to bubble up. You could have a situation that you've seen a lot, particularly beginning in the Obama era, where you have this coalition of more hawkish Democrats and hawkish Republicans come together to push this NDA through. And, again, just like with some of the last Ukraine aid packages, you could have the majority of Republicans voting against it. I'm not sure if that's going to happen, but that's a possibility. But it's really unfortunate that the NDAA seems more focused on preventing President Trump from realigning foreign policy and actually centering it on what is important to the United States of America. And they should be coming alongside and helping them on it, not trying to handcuff them.
Yeah. Just to give one concrete example of this, and disclosure, I saw this on X.com, have no idea if it's real, but I saw somebody was talking about that one of the provisions in there was that they were going to withhold 25% of Secretary Hegseth's travel budget unless he released footage of the drone strikes on some of these alleged drug boats. First of all, is that true? And secondly, are there any other interesting examples of that where they are actively trying to handcuff the Trump?
I believe they actually do that to several DoD officials. Like if Undersecretary Bridge Colby, doesn't give them a certain number of briefings, they're going to try and withhold some of his travel budget. And that just seems, I just got to be honest, that's really petty in my view. But I think the biggest example of them handcuffing the president is trying to put up roadblocks to him withdrawing troops from Europe. and requiring them to jump through certain hoops to certify that he's not undermining security. I actually think I need to research this a little more, but there was one part in there that I actually thought was kind of dangerous in terms of civil military relations, where it empowers the supreme allied commander, the senior military official in EUCOM, to make certain recommendations and decisions around force posture and provision of certain weapons to Ukraine in Europe, that in my view actually undermines the civilian leadership at the Department of Defense.
Yeah.
And I think that longer term, that's really dangerous because we have a civilian-led military for a reason. That is very important. And even though a lot of people in this town like to put, our generals up on a pedestal and they deserve respect, but they are not demigods. They are not above accountability. And when you start giving them power like that, that actually enables them in some ways to undermine the appointed civilian leadership of the Department of Defense, civilians that are appointed by the elected president, that is incredibly dangerous in the long run.
Well, I mean, where was this kind of opposition to anything that Joe Biden did, anything that Barack Obama did, anything that George W. Bush did on foreign policy? Maybe I just missed it, but there was no large enough coalition of House members or senators or whatever to stop a lot of these foreign policy.
You would have a lot of Republican members complaining that Joe Biden wasn't doing enough for Ukraine, and then or that he had a bad Ukraine strategy, and then turn around and just fund it.
Yeah,
just give essentially a blank check for it. And
so this is just TDS then.
I don't know if it's TDS. I think what it is it's maybe PDS, primacy derangement syndrome. It's just that again, there's a lot of great members of Congress.
Yeah.
Particularly on the Republican side on foreign policy. Like, I wish there were more Eric Schmidts.
My gosh.
And Josh Hawleys on that.
Totally.
But there's still a lot of members that still think it's they either still think it's 1991 and we just won the Cold War, or they still think it's 2005 before things got really bad in Iraq and Afghanistan. They want to pretend the last 20, 30 years haven't happened.
Well, most of them are so old that that's when their kids got out of the house and they started watching the news again, you know? What we've talked about Russia and Ukraine a lot, but just to kind of distill it here, one thing that I've been saying to a lot of the young people that come through our programs that are looking for jobs after and that sort of thing is administrations are actually really long. Like it feels like, again, that this year has been 10 years of policy making, crammed into one. So we're about to be, have 3 years left on the clock. And it's a lot to resolve a major conflict, right? What do you think the actual end game here is in Russia and Ukraine?
So it's an evolving situation. And as we speak, you have some of the people we've talked about: Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, Secretary Rubio, Secretary of the Army Dan Driscoll, are all working through different things with the Ukrainians and the Russians, trying to get a framework. But ultimately, I think this is going to end the way that it was going to end all the way back in the beginning of 2022. And that is with a peace for Ukraine that appears ugly, but it has the potential to be a decent peace that enables them to exist as a sovereign country with hopefully a prosperous future. I think that what could prevent that is the war going on much longer, because Ukraine, as the president just said in a big interview with Politico, they are at a disadvantage when it comes to manpower, weapons, now financial. Ukraine's facing a financial crisis, and the Europeans may bail them out, but they can't do that forever. And so where this is going to end is either with Ukrainian collapse, which is, I don't think anybody wants to see that, or it ends with an ugly but decent peace where Ukraine gives up territory, where they don't join NATO, where they have to face some restrictions possibly on their military, but they have a future. Like Finland had a future after World War II, like Austria did. I think that's the best case scenario, a Finland type scenario after World War II.
Yeah. Well, I want to end on a light note because you, and people may know this about you, but you are one of the funniest people that I know. We were having a conversation recently about why Christmas parties are bad. We are in Christmas party season currently.
This is important.
I've got a Christmas party like on my calendar for every day of the week from now until Christmas Eve. And I have decided to not go to any more.
Yes.
Because of what you told me the other day.
Yes. This is important. People don't know this. There's a direct line between a Christmas party in the late 1940s and 9/11. So there was an Egyptian gentleman by the name of Saeed Qutb, who came to the United States as an exchange student, and he went to Colorado. He went to a teacher's college there. And one day in the winter, he goes to a Christmas party at a church, and he hears the song, "Baby, It's Cold Outside." And he was so disturbed by that experience. He was so crushed by that experience. And he left the United States, returned to Egypt, was radicalized in his Islamic faith, and he joined the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood, eventually becoming its key leader. And he became the godfather of modern Islamic fundamentalism and modern jihadism. And he would inspire figures like Osama bin Laden, Ayman al-Zawahiri. In fact, he helped kind of seed groups that eventually would become part of Al-Qaeda, like Egyptian Islamic Jihad. And obviously, those are the individuals that, conducted 9/11, one of the worst days in American history. And it all began at a Christmas party in Greeley, Colorado in the late 1940s. And it was listening to Christmas music and dancing and having a good time instead of just simply celebrating the birth of our Lord and Savior. So again, that is why I don't go to Christmas parties, and why I think, any American that wants to ensure we don't have another disastrous day, 9/11, should not go to a Christmas party.
Go to Christmas parties. Is this more of an indictment on Christmas parties or the song "Baby, It's Cold Outside"?
Well, remember all the woke people went after that song? Yeah. Maybe if they would have gone at it from the fact that this song led to 9/11 and the disaster, the post 9/11 wars, maybe that would have been a better way to go at it. And we wouldn't be listening to it.
I would have been all in. I would have been like, okay, we can cancel that song.
I'm just like, that's just, this is just me being a jerk. I didn't I don't know, Christmas just.
This is a true story though, right? You're not making this up.
No, I mean, this literally what happened. Like you can, it's been well documented that he came to America, spent 2 years here, and was radicalized in that experiment. Now, there's a lot of other, and on a serious note, maybe there's a lot of other lessons we can draw out of that, around who's coming into America, who's leaving and not. But yeah.
So on that note, for all of you that have been asking me when American Moment is hosting a Christmas party, the answer is we're not.
Yes.
And it's Dan Caldwell's fault.
Yes.
I'm actually joking. It's just that there's too many Christmas parties. There's too many. We can't host one, but we are going to have a party in January that you should keep an eye out for the invite for. Dan, thank you so much for coming again on Moment of Truth, and we're excited to have you on the team.
I am looking forward to doing this again. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to another fantastic episode of Moment of Truth, and thanks to Dan for making the time to be here. It's always great to have him in studio, and we are very excited to have him on the team and all the important work he's going to be doing here at American Moment, making sure that we have great personnel that can work on this foreign policy issue. So you can follow him on X. I think it's at Dan C. Maybe it's just Dan Caldwell, or it's either that or Dan C. Caldwell, something like that. Just look up his name. You'll find him. You'll figure it out. You can see all the great things that he posts on that website. And you can also follow us at American Moment. So thank you again for tuning in to another episode of Moment of Truth, and we will see you again next week. Moment of Truth is an American Moment podcast taped at the Conservative Partnership Campus Studios and is produced by Jake Mercier and Hunter Smith, with original graphics and title cards by Jared Cummings. Our intro song is A Minor Struggle by Ryan Saranich, and our website is AmericanMoment.org.